Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Outer North East Community Committee. My name is Councillor Norma Harrington and I'll be chairing today's meeting. The Outer North East Community Committee covers all Woodley, Harewood and Wetherby wards, and is a committee where ward councillors have an opportunity to discuss and make decisions about services and priorities for the local areas, and also consider funding applications for local community projects and youth activities. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves, and I'll start with Councillor Neil Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Neil Buckley, Old Woodley Ward.
Councillor Dan Cohen.
Not surprisingly, I am in fact Councillor Dan Cohen.
Councillor Sam Firth.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Robinson isn't here. So Councillor Stevenson, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yep, that's me, Ryan Stevenson.
Councillor Lamb.
Good evening, everyone. Councillor Alan Lamb from Wetherby Ward.
Councillor Richards.
Good evening, everyone. Councillor Linda Richards from Wetherby Ward.
And Councillor Firth.
Last but not least, Councillor Sam Firth, Harewood Ward.
We have officers present this evening. We have Sustainable Energy and Air Quality, Polly Cook.
Hi, Polly Kirk, Chief Officer, Sustainable Energy and Air Quality.
David Feeney.
Good evening, everybody. David Feeney, I'm Chief Planning Officer for Leeds.
Gillian MacLeod.
Hello, Gillian MacLeod, Transport Development Services Manager at Leeds.
Good evening, John Woolmer, Chief Officer for Environmental Services.
Thank you, John. Andrew Birkbeck.
Hi, Chair. Andy Birkbeck, Locality Programme Manager. I am here in lieu of Liz Jarman tonight.
Thank you, Andrew. And Preet.
Thanks, Chair. Preet Kundi, Localities Officer.
Absolutely, last but not least, John Grieve.
Good evening, everyone. John Grieve, Governance Services.
So moving to agenda item number 1.
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item number 1, there were no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under item 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of the press or public. Item 3, late items. Yes, there is a late item of business in relation to refuse collection review. That has been circulated, so members should have a copy in front of them. We also have some supplementary information in respect of the finance report. And again, we've got some additional wellbeing applications. And again, hopefully members have got those in front of them. Item 4, apologies for absence. Yes, Chair, Councillor Harron and Councillor Robinson have sent their apologies in. Item 5, could I ask members to declare any interests they may have? I see none, so I'll assume that's none. Item 6, open forum. I'm unaware of any items of business for the open forum. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so item number 7 is minutes of the previous meeting held on the 8th of December. Are we happy that these minutes be accepted as a correct record, please? Okay, thank you. Everybody all right with those? Yeah. Thank you very much. And item number 8 is matters arising from the minutes. Are there any that any member wishes to raise? No, nobody's saying anything. Councillor Lamb's looking at me. Are you? Oh, I think you need some. Yeah. Can we just pause the live meeting for a few minutes while we sort this small situation out? Does any member wish to raise any items as matters arising? No. Okay, thank you very much. So the first item on the agenda for one of our officers is agenda item number 9, climate emergency update. And could I invite Polly Cook to present this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. So just going to share a screen with some slides up and walk you through. So today I'm just intending to go through some of the specific things that are happening within your community committee area. So the first scheme that I want to talk about is the public sector decarbonisation scheme, which was the, oh, that's not working very well, is it on the, oh, okay, there we go. So this is the 25 million that we got awarded last year. So at the bottom of that slide, it just sets out the specific schemes that we have done within your area. So Bardsey Primary School is still ongoing because there were a lot of issues around the planning for that site and also the DNO, but it will be completed within the next couple of months. Wetherby as well is still underway, and St James's Primary School, sorry, Wetherby Leisure Centre is still underway, and St James's Primary School is the image that you can see actually up on that picture. We also have managed to secure some additional funding for the third phase of PSDS, and our Woodley Primary School will benefit from that. It's worth just saying that the criteria have changed really dramatically again from the PSDS stage 1 and PSDS stage 3. It's much more difficult to actually meet the criteria. So the pounds per tonne of carbon has gone down. So it's much more difficult to put in things like solar. And also boilers at sites that we look at literally have to be at point of collapse to be able to include them. So it's really limited the sites we can focus on going forward. So that's the public sector scheme. I don't know whether people want to ask questions on each of the schemes as we go through, or at the end, I'm happy to do it either way. No, okay. So the next thing is just about electric vehicles. So we've had a number of different schemes. So the one that's up on this slide, and it's just coming to an end now, is the electric van scheme that we have promoted. So it's displaced 330,000 miles by businesses, and the idea is that a business trials the van for 2 months. And then they get provided with a business case. They can see whether it works for their business and make an informed decision. So it's trying to take some of the risk away from businesses. And within your area, this is just an example of some of the ones that have participated. So we've had Harewood Estate, Moor Lodge Caravan Park, Circles of Life Women Together, Mail Flow Solutions, and UK Refurb Limited. But that is just some of the businesses within your area, but there's been over 160 businesses across the city that have participated. Then just in terms of electric vehicle charge points, so again, there's been a number of different schemes across Wetherby. There's been the Cluster of Nuts charge point, and there's just some statistics there about how much they're being used. So that one's actually been used 6.5 times a day on average. And the Boston Spa one is currently being used about 2.5 times a day. And then we are also just about to install in Crossley Street car park in Wetherby. So just going on to the next one, what this graph shows is just the general increase in terms of electric vehicle transition that we're seeing in the city. And the line at the top of that is actually Leeds. So we're seeing much more rapid growth in Leeds than elsewhere. And I think we have done quite a lot to try and facilitate that in terms of the grant funding we've applied for and managed to install across the city, things like the electric van scheme. Our own attitude as a council, we have one of the greenest fleets of any local authority with over 300 vans. And this year, what we are looking at is a real transition. So we took our electric vehicle charging plan to Executive Board in February. And the move really is away from grant investment and how we attract private investment into the city to deliver a wider range of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and how we use that to support those people who don't have access to their own home charging, and how we make sure that that's spread out across the city. So that went in February and got approved, and now we're just looking at how we actually enact that. And over the next year, I think we'll see a real growth in charge points. But what we aren't trying to do is put charge points outside individual people's houses. And what we're trying to do is make sure that people have access to charge points within a reasonable distance, the same as people would have for petrol stations. currently, just because of obviously the conflict between sort of active travel, but also disabled access and pushchair access across pavements if we had cables trailing. So just talking now about the kind of housing offer. So I think this has been promoted a couple of times across to all ward members, that we have different funding streams that residents can apply for. The criteria are really, really challenging to meet. So you have to be on a household income of less than 30,000, but own your own house, or possibly if you live in a rented house, a landlord can also apply, but they have to then put some match funding to it. We have had more than 280 households citywide that have applied for that. And it's still open until the 31st of March. So obviously there's still an opportunity to promote, but this is something we've been promoting for the last sort of 6 months or so. And that's really looking at sort of solar or insulation. And it's just trying to make the most of the grant funding streams that are available to help those that are likely to be struggling more in terms of fuel poverty. And then just going on to the White Rose Forest. So we already have the council's commitment about planting 50 hectares of trees every year. What we're doing is working across the region now. So obviously White Rose Forest is much bigger than just Leeds, and the Kirklees is the leading authority on it, but we work across all the authorities about how we start to promote to landlords. I'm still on the housing slide, landowners, to give them access to the funding. So the White Rose group actually facilitate access to funding. So our role is more about promoting and making those connections at this stage. And I think last time when Chad came, there was sort of some interest in terms of just looking at air quality data in a bit more detail. So what we've got on this slide is the data that we have this year. So the 5 sites for 2021. So it's still provisional because it goes through a kind of correction process, but I will show you the data that is approved from 2019. But what you can see even from the sort of indicative data from this year is that within the area, it's well below the legal limit, which is 40 micrograms on an average annual basis. So the chart, I know you won't be able to work out which line's which, but I suppose what that is showing, so each of those lines represents a different monitoring place within your community area. And I suppose what that's showing is the downward trend, because obviously as we're moving to the right, they're all going lower. Also, what you can see really clearly from that is actually all of them are well below the 40 microgram limit. On the next couple of pages, you've got the sort of specific sites to have a look at the different data. Probably not the time to go through it here, but obviously you've got the data, and if you have specific questions, we can take those away and work with the environmental team. Just in terms of air quality monitoring, what you will see within your area in particular is there are sites that have been monitored, then they stop being monitored and others have come on. That's because I think once you see what the baseline is over a year or 2 years, if you can see that it's well below the 40, then we don't keep on monitoring. So I think sometimes people will have asked for a specific site to be monitored. It's monitored to show that it is below, and then that will be moved elsewhere because it is actually quite resource intensive, the manual tubes that are put up. So that's why you've got kind of a variety of different sites coming and going, just so people understand. But ultimately we use air quality modelling to try and understand what's happening in the whole area. So this is almost a backup to that. But as you can see, everywhere is well below legal compliance limits. I'm going to stop there, and then I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has got any.
Can I just mention also that David Feeney is here from a planning perspective, because I know some officers last time had some questions about how climate emergency links in with planning, and then also some highways, but I understand that you can only answer from an LCC perspective, and it's not anything, if it's anything to do with WICA, then that has to go elsewhere. Is that right? Okay, so I can throw it open to questions, please, if you'd like to indicate. So I'll take Councillor Firth first and then Councillor Buckley.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Polly and colleagues, for that presentation. Can I just ask, first of all, whether it be possible to see figures compared to all of the core cities for EV, just simply because it was interesting, those that had been picked. If the figures aren't available, then that's understandable. For example, two notable exceptions that I think are certainly comparisons as well as Sheffield in terms of size are Manchester and Birmingham. The other question was going to ask more generally in terms of also looking at the funded solar and insulation. Could you provide some more meat on the bone about the programme itself in terms of take up and actually what sort of targets were placed in the first place? Because I appreciate there's a lot of information about what the schemes involved, but actually there's not much information in terms of, as far as I can see, actually what the take up and the success of the programme so far has been, and just really to understand how it's been promoted in terms of actually making sure that we do, especially as energy costs rise, make sure that these sorts of schemes are headline news as much as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so I haven't got the data to hand, obviously, on Manchester and Birmingham, but more than happy to come back with that. In terms of the funding, so we have really detailed data in terms of the housing across the city. So we use that to do targeted mail outs to houses that we think would fall into the right EPC categories, are likely to be in the lower income. So we did the targeted mail outs. We've done various press releases and media, and also obviously through social media. Have I missed anything, Chad?
Yes, so I can help answer the first question as well. Those electric vehicle statistics, they come from the Department for Transport. The reason Manchester isn't on there because we was looking at local authorities, and obviously that's the wider region, but we can certainly share the data because it has everything. So you can look at it by regional level, a local authority level, all the different levels. In terms of the communication for the scheme of the Green Homes Grant Scheme, we've written to all of the eligible households based on the EPC data that we hold, the SAP data. We have issued several press releases, so it's been picked up in the newspapers on Look North. We've done targeted social advertising. We've actually been to Wetherby at an event to kind of promote it there. And a range of other things, and contacted every member. So we've tried everything we could. We've actually had more than 1,000 applications. It's just it gets whittled down quite a lot in terms of eligibility. So that's a challenge that we found, but we've tried everything that we can do, really.
No, thank you for that, both Polly and Chad. I just wanted to ask really in terms of then the targets then, were there any particular targets that you'd set out at the beginning of the programme to achieve in terms of then actually what was hit? And actually more generally, whether you could actually provide stone cold figures and actually the turnover from those that you're actually contacting to then actually responding to those requests. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, so we have all of that data. I don't have it to hand. If I had my laptop open, I could find it. So we have, because there's about 3 or 4 different grant schemes that are running all sort of combined. They've all got different targets. So we actually went back and bid for more money for the second phase. And we also have done social housing through some of the grants. So I'm happy to supply all of that data so you can see what we've got. And I can also do like how many applied and how many we couldn't, didn't meet the criteria for whatever reasons. We have all of that data to hand.
Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions, but they're all nice and friendly. We had the SEAC meeting, as Polly knows, obviously, a few days ago, and we had somebody there from Yorkshire Water, and I won't go into the whole thing again, but he gave us quite a detailed presentation about a kind of a top-down overview of what they were doing nationally and locally. But my question, which was concerning planning really, was that they've actually sold several woods, 2 of which are in my ward. And I just wondered, from a planning point of view, it's already been the case that one applicant has made 3 applications to build in the wood, which effectively would mean that the wood would disappear. And they've all been turned down, and it's gone to appeal, and that's been turned down. But there's been another application now to the next road, which, looking at it just without thinking about it, is a completely different road, but actually the garden backs onto the wood. And I just wanted, my first question really was, are planning aware of these particular situations where Yorkshire Water have done this? That's the first question. I also mentioned street trees at the SEAC meeting, because we're planting lots and lots of trees, no problem whatsoever, all in favour of that. But a lot of roads which have had trees planted, some of them in the 1920s, 30s, 50s, obviously they die, but there seems to be a reluctance on the part of forestry to actually do the individual replacements. My third point is just slightly different. Clean air in particular. I know that the quality of air has improved, and it has improved year by year, particularly in Leeds, as the graph shows. But how is Bradford are going to have a clean air zone, aren't they? And presumably the government are not paying for that. So are Bradford paying for that? Penultimate point, the charging points that we're putting in, and I can't remember what your reply was the other day on this, Polly. Are we putting in all the same types of points, or is it different points? Because there are different particular things, aren't there? And final question, and it's a bit of an overall question really. Given the situation that we're in nationally at the moment, with the situation in the Ukraine and the government situation and so on, there's quite a thought at the moment that we're going to have to spend more on defence, for example, and less on other things. Has it crossed people's minds that there's a possibility that these funding streams might suddenly be chopped or tailed off? Thank you, Chair.
Over to you, Polly and David.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question, Councillor Buckley. I'll cover the Yorkshire Water one and then touch on the tree issue that you've raised. But on the Yorkshire Water one, I wasn't personally aware that they'd been disposing of their assets in that way. It's often the case that landowners rationalise their estates from time to time. If the people who are buying Yorkshire Water's land are then seeking to develop those sites, then that would be subject to the planning process and they would have to put an application in. If the woodlands, which they're likely to be, have some level of protection upon them, if they're designated under a biodiversity designation, then they would be afforded a level of protection through planning policy on that. If the location of those woodlands are within the green belt, then green belt policy would be restricting isolated development in those locations, because it would be contrary to national green belt as well as local green belt policy. So I suspect that was the reason it was turned down, the one that you've referred to. In terms of street trees, obviously colleagues from forestry aren't here, but if those replacements are linked to a planning condition on a planning application, then that's something we could potentially enforce against if replacements were needed and they weren't being replaced. So that's something we could look at as a planning enforcement issue. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so I shall pick up from the clean air zone in Bradford. So they are the same as us. So it is being funded by government because their air quality is still non-compliant. So they'll be the same as us in the sense they'll get support packages to help businesses and obviously to install the infrastructure. And obviously Bradford has some of the sort of geography doesn't lend itself in terms, it traps some of the air pollution, which is why they're still struggling in places. In terms of the charging point, they're not necessarily all the same because there's rapid and fast chargers going in. And I suppose one of the philosophies is that actually there's a benefit to having a variety of charge points in the sense that we keep competition within the city. And I think I made probably the point earlier in the week that we wouldn't want to have all one type of petrol station because then you end up with a monopoly, and it will be the same with the charge points. We want there to be healthy competition in the city to keep the prices affordable for residents. In terms of funding streams, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because obviously what's happening at the moment, we are seeing energy prices like we've not seen before. And I have the lucky job of buying energy for the council, so I'm watching it fairly closely. So actually what you're seeing is there's actually more of an interest in terms of actually investing in cutting energy. The business cases stack up more easily. For certain industries, we've been approached by some of the schools and things who are obviously interested to see what they can do from a solar panel point of view. So it may be that funding streams get cut, but actually some of the business cases will work in different ways as well. And I think, like I said, for the electric vehicle charging, we're also looking for different ways of doing things so that not everything is dependent on grant, and trying to make sure that we have commercial investment in the city. So it's always a concern, but I think, we're looking so we're not dependent on one funding stream to make sure that we can still keep delivering.
Councillor Lamb, you had a question?
I'd like to say I had a question, Chair, but I've got 4 specific questions, and then I'd like to make a wider comment. I'd be grateful for people to comment on. So the 4 specific things are: A, can you give us a breakdown of the electric vehicle take-up by ward, or by, so I think it was 20,000 or something, and showed us well ahead of the other core cities, but are you able to break that figure down any more than that? No. So we can't see if certain parts of the city are doing better than others. Okay, that answers that. The same question was about the funded solar and insulation breakdown. Obviously, I'm grateful that you've tried to make this more specific to our area, but it just said how many for the city. It'd be useful to know if there are any or how many in our area. On the air quality slides that you showed, there's obviously significant fall off. My assumption looking at it is a large part of that is due to lockdown. And is that your assessment, or is there something else going on? Because it seems to coincide timing wise. And then the final thing, and it won't be a surprise to many people that have raised this issue, is one thing that's not covered in here is blue infrastructure and sewage pollution, which is a real problem in our area, across the city, across the country. It's topical today, with Yorkshire Water being one of those mentioned in the press as being a problem. And while I totally accept and understand it is the Environment Agency and the police of this, Yorkshire Water are involved, I do think there's an opportunity for the council perhaps to look at showing some leadership in trying to resolve the issue. We're looking at it through development plans panel as part of the local plan update, but I just wonder if you've got any comment about that, and if you could respond to those, then if I could make a more broad point, please.
So I don't think we do have the data for the breakdown by ward. I don't think we had it to hand. I presume that we can ultimately can produce it, yeah, so I can come back again with that. It's a bit more a manual process to go through with all the households. In terms of the air quality data, there's a couple of things at play. So obviously there have been some changes in commuting patterns and things from COVID, but we've also seen a complete improvement in our fleet. So if I go back to sort of the clean air zone times, the bus fleet has gone up to something like 90% compliant. The same with the HGV fleet, the same with taxi and private hire. But then you've also got the natural upgrade of cars. So every year air quality will naturally improve. And what we've seen in Leeds is a kind of quicker a sort of acceleration of that process because of some of the funding that went in to support fleet upgrade. But you'll also be seeing the change in traffic patterns and things. So you're not getting the kind of peak pollution events that you were getting because you're getting more of a steady transport pattern. So it's a mixture of all those things. But the modelling that we've done, so in terms of specifically around the clean air zone, which I know didn't relate to your area, but the sort of principles will be the same, is that even if we were to return to like 5% higher traffic than pre-COVID, we would still stay within compliance levels. And that's just because of the change in fleet and the upgrade in fleet now. So that was that one. In terms of blue infrastructure and sewage, I don't know whether you've got anything you want to comment on that, David.
I think, as Councillor Lamb said, it's an issue that we've raised through development plan panel, and one of the components of the local plan update is to look at green and blue infrastructure, and the intention is to try and strengthen the policy bases that we already have. I think we've acknowledged in development plan panel that planning overlaps with other legislation as well. So the Water Framework Directive, for example, we don't want to be duplicating what other agencies are doing, but through a development plan process, if we can raise awareness of that issue and exercise some control from a policy perspective, then there's an opportunity to do so. We would have to satisfy an inspector that our policy approach was sound, and clearly we'd want to go through further consultation, which we are doing on the local plan update, but certainly it's a valid point that we are picking up through that process.
So, I mean, just to follow up on that, I just wonder if we'd consider that in the climate emergency plan. I know it's about energy and air quality, but it feels to me there's perhaps a gap in our approach to pollution of blue infrastructure and waterways. And I wonder if that's something you might take away and think about and come back to us. The wider point I wanted to make, Chair, was this is the second time this has come to the committee, and Chad did an excellent job. I think it's fair to say we were challenging last time, and he was superb in the circumstances. Grateful that we've got a stellar cast in front of us, but the reason for that really is, I think, and other colleagues will agree or not, but I think we feel, and this is feedback we get from our residents, that with a lot of this agenda, it's really important to us, it's really important to our communities, but we feel like a bit of an afterthought when it comes to whether that's from the climate emergency perspective, from the planning perspective, and from the transport perspective. It's kind of highlighted by the maps that were presented, where frequently we don't even feature on them. And the presentation last time came to us without even including big chunks of our area on the maps. And it's things like development that we've been talking about this afternoon, which is going to be car dependent against the backdrop of a climate emergency, that when we hear transport policy and things, it's difficult for our area. But I think what I said last time was, it seems because it's difficult that we're going to do nothing at all. And I think that's the feedback really I wanted to share, that I know you're passionate about, and I'm sure you're not going to say that our area is not an afterthought, but that's how we feel, and we really welcome the opportunity to do much more in probably an area and a community that's more willing and able and engaged to do more than any other part of the city. And yeah, and I think we could be real exemplars and help you to do more on this agenda, but we kind of feel like the focus is always elsewhere. And so that's really what I wanted to share.
Councillor Stevenson, did you have a question? Oh, sorry, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just to comment from the planning side, I mean, just to give you and members here and people listening the reassurance, we don't see Wetherby as an afterthought. The policies that we're working hard to bring forward in terms of the local plan update are district wide, and they'll be as strong in Wetherby as they will be anywhere else. And I would welcome further comment on those draft policies when we go through public consultation in the summer. And I think it's the richness and depth of those comments that helps to shape that detail, and particularly local evidence. So I think the evidence that has been prepared for the purposes of this meeting is really useful in highlighting those particular issues locally, because no doubt they will be replicated elsewhere. So I think that's been a helpful exercise which will inform our process. So it's a reassurance from me that we are taking these issues seriously in Wetherby and elsewhere across the district. Climate change knows no boundaries. So why would we want to exclude one part of the district over another? So it's all about looking at it in the round and going as far as we can, as quickly as we can.
Nothing, just to say from my point of view, every scheme that we do, we treat the whole city the same, we promote it. But we are always looking for people who do want to be advocates and want to help us lead the way. And, so things like when we were invited to the Wetherby event and we had that opportunity to come and talk to residents, we're more than happy to support. So if there's opportunities like that to engage, things that you think we can help with, them, just get in touch and we'll see what we can do. But everything we do look at the whole city. We don't, prioritise one area over another.
Councillor Stevenson, did you have a question?
I'll be quick, Chair, thanks. On this slide regarding this accelerating EV transition, it's a bit of a concern that half the organisations who took part decided they weren't going to switch to electric vehicles, especially when shortly via legislation will be forcing them to. So was there any feedback from those who didn't want to switch? And what, out of interest for this scheme, what was the cost to the council? Because clearly putting miles on vehicles that we lease or bought will have had a cost. So what was the cost? And just as a minor point on the next slide, although it's outside of my ward, I do frequent the Boston Spa car park occasionally. And whenever you go there, it's exceptionally busy and there's always one space empty. And it's the electric vehicle charging space that says taxi only. So why do we make those spaces available? Because look at the figures, it's not actually that well used really, looking at what you've given us. And it strikes me that it would probably be used even more if more people could use that space.
Okay, I'm going to answer some of them, then I'm going to let Chad just come in as well. So in terms of the cost of the electric van scheme, it didn't cost the council anything. So it was funding that came from Highways England. And actually we benefit from that because the vans come back into our ownership. So actually it acts as a cost saving to the council of replacing our fleet. In terms of the electric vehicle charging space, that and having it as a taxi only, that was part of the grant condition from government that we had to have that. So we agreed that we could have it used for both. So that was the compromise we got to, but we had to, in order to access the funding, we had to have one of them as taxi only. And that was just part of the grant condition that was put in place.
Does that mean people can use the taxi only? It's a bit like it's a really bad example, but a disabled toilet, for example, you should give way to a less able person, but anybody can use it.
But, well,
when in terms of both, there's a charging point that connects to multiple bays. So both means there's a bay for the general public, and then there's a parking bay for the taxi. So that's what the condition was in terms of, and I think it also came out of the consultation that we did with taxi private hire during the clean air zone consultation, in that we were telling them, we want you to switch to ultra low emission vehicles. And one of the pieces of feedback that they were regularly saying was there's not enough charge points available to us. Yeah, and in terms of the electric vehicle trials, some more stats like that in terms of the experience that people are having is that when people have finished the scheme and we ask them to do a feedback form, more than 90% are saying that they're satisfied with the scheme. And then the 50% figure is about, have you purchased an electric vehicle? Or are you planning to purchase or lease an electric vehicle? But we are getting feedback, and it is true that some businesses are saying, look, the range just isn't there for us right now, based on the kind of journeys that we do. The fitting in charging isn't working for us. So, it's just, the limits of the technology at the moment, are prohibitive for some businesses. But, for 50%, they were saying, actually, this seems to be working really well for us. And I think as time goes on and as the technology improves, hopefully if this trial was to happen, repeat in a couple of years' time, hopefully it'd be a higher percentage. But no, it's not perfect for every vehicle at the moment. But it is helpful for them to understand that if they were interested, at no cost to them as well.
Thank you, Polly and David, for that. Councillor Lamb, did you have another question? You're right. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to look at the White Rose Forest particular slide. The one thing I would say is I think it's a fantastic map. I'm just a bit surprised by some of the descriptions of where and when they are, especially obviously given that the Harewood ward, the name Harewood is obviously taken from the village in the northwest corner. But I wanted to ask about the major infrastructure project that is running through the edge of our ward is currently the East Leeds Orbital Road. And as part of that scheme, obviously thousands of new trees are being planted. I just wanted to ask, particularly with the fact that there's going to be a new pocket park at Winmore being developed and other things to try and effectively create the biggest green buffer we can around the E-Law to obviously insulate Skulls, Thorner, Shadwell. could you confirm what work, if you're doing any with them, or is there anything in particular that maybe that's something we could take up further outside to ensure that we deliver on that that ambition?
I'm sure my colleagues would be able to answer that, but I'm afraid I can't. I know that there's been an awful lot of community engagement in terms of the tree planting and tree planting events with the community. I don't have the detail, I'm afraid, so I can't really comment on it. But if there's I can take away and email back if that would be helpful.
No, thank you. No, I think the best thing we can do is start that conversation. I think the biggest thing is that always there's been that impression that ultimately there is a massive infrastructure project tearing through the countryside, and as a result, we need to make sure that ultimately, well, we've always had it on the assumption that that will effectively form, for now, at least for the very long future, let's hope, the boundary of Leeds' development. And as a result, it's just trying to make sure that we can absolutely lock that in and secure it in terms of actually creating and using something like this. But I appreciate at the same time that there's not much public land in that vicinity, and therefore it will take engagement with private owners to go from there. So that's something that certainly we can take forward outside. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Well, thank you for the questions, colleagues, and thank you very much, Polly, David, Gillian and Chad. We did appreciate what you did last time when you came, Chad, but it was just, yeah, we have some fairly challenging members who had some very pertinent questions, and you tried valiantly to answer them. But thank you very much for coming this evening. Thank you. So the next item is the late item, which is Waste Management Services, an update on the refuse service review. Mr. Woolmer.
Thanks, Chair. Caught me a bit unawares there. I thought I was going to be on the end, but thank you. It was a request for myself for me to really attend today's meeting. I think more to answer questions, I think, and that you have. But I've provided, albeit late, a couple of pieces of background information to provide some context. Which those two items that you should have, hopefully, I've had some chance to read them, but they're in front of you now. Are the objectives of the refuse service review, a reminder of what they are, and broken down into some detail, each of the objectives, and a kind of a baseline position, if you like, that explains what we currently do. And hopefully that's useful for members, if not just for this meeting, for the information meetings you might have. That's clearly a citywide position. It's not something that drills down to any particular detail for this community committee. So I provided that as some context. So perhaps if I just spend a few moments updating you where we are with the review and how we see that going over the next few months. And then the second part of what you asked me to come here to talk about was around particularly to focus on glass and food, and where I see that perhaps going over the next year or two and beyond. So if that's okay, Chair, I'll perhaps do the first bit first, pause, and then do the second bit after that. So in terms of the refuse service review, again, you've got the objectives there. It's quite. I'd just like to remind members that what we're trying to do now, when we originally started to look at the review of the refuse, it was very much focused on just the routes and what was at the time called a rationalisation review. And we moved on from that to say, look, it's not just about routes, so that's fundamentally what it's about, still about the fact that the routes are out of date. The areas such as yours experience that in terms of the unreliability of the service to complete every day. So a lot of the routes have outgrown themselves, developments have happened, people's habits have changed, and crews are sometimes struggling to finish because to complete the routes at the end of the day. And that's been an issue that's for your area, certainly, across the city, but for certainly this area. So we needed to just do a technical exercise, really, just to redesign all the routes across the city and make sure they could actually achieve what they're meant to achieve each day. Because the city's grown, obviously, a tremendous amount in the last 10 years, which is roughly when the last review was done. So that was the sort of technical part of it. But you'll see from the objectives that the review has, that I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just about that. It was about the culture of the place, about how we be more customer focused, how we look to be more accountable, re-look at our relationship with the community committees, make sure we design the service around that so it doesn't happen by accident. So one of the clear objectives is to design the routes so that they are more coterminous with community committees. That'll help me in terms of then staffing and having supervisors and crews that are more aligned to your area, as clean neighbourhoods generally are, for example, and also help in terms of gathering of information and performance statistics for the future. So we'll be more able to provide things that have make more sense and able to present them to places such as here. And as I've mentioned as well, it's also about our efforts to try and move the culture of the service on, as I believe it has done. We've not got there totally, but move it on to be more customer focused and as well as just being accountable. And that does require quite deep change, in terms of the culture of a place, how it's managed, how people are supported and challenged where necessary. And that's something I've been trying to do the best I can for the last 2 or 3 years, certainly, and hopefully made some inroads into. And an example of that, I think, would be when, whilst we still undertake this review and mend things fully, I have tried where we can to meet with yourselves and to make sure you're connected up with local managers that you have pretty much a hotline to, like Steve Walpole, people like that, that you've got a more connected relationship perhaps than you've historically had with refuse. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but clearly we're not there. So that's the purpose of the review. And it's, like I say, it's a huge technical exercise as well. We did, before the pandemic struck, manage to get to the garden waste part of it. So we did start the review, and some of those objectives we've achieved and made some good inroads into. The garden waste collection was part of that, and we redesigned those routes and relaunched those in 2021 during the pandemic. We've also made some inroads into things like introducing charge hand roles in the service, so that we've got an actual accountable person within the crews now that we can then deal with in terms of supporting them, training them, and where necessary, taking any action to try and to improve performance. So that's been a big step forward for us. We've made some inroads, but not completely, into some of the processes behind how the refuse works. So the in-cab technology, for example, making sure that's more habitually used and actually works. That still isn't 100% right. We're getting there with that. We're just going through a procurement process at the moment to upgrade all that technology to hopefully get in place handheld devices that like tablets that the crews would use as in-cab technology. At the moment, they're all fixed. So if we can get them tablets, then that'll make it much easier for us to upgrade, update, make sure the things work, and replace it easy with a different model if they need a different screen to take out, so they can't just potentially use the excuse, well, the in-cab's not working, it hasn't been working for 2 or 3 days. But also it has the potential for them to take it out, take pictures with, and then send the picture of an obstruction or whatever it might be, access you immediately to us, to the centre, then to pick up on, potentially even to include in the end of the day reports if technology allows. I think we have made some improvements for the end of day reporting. I think over the last 2 or 3 years in terms of the information that's provided, the format of it. We've listened to, particularly through issues raised at scrutiny, around what's contained in the report, what was unnecessary detail in terms of technical stuff, route numbers and things, but what you actually need, what bin type it is, where the actual location is, what the actual problem was, and being more and having more meaningful explanations than we previously provided. I do believe that we've made some improvements in terms of reliability of those end of day reports. I think they're a lot more reliable than they were, but I recognise that still there's occasions when some streets aren't on that should be, but that's all part of the review. So I just wanted to reflect on that, and obviously what I'm sure you're keen to hear is where we are now with the progress. Now the pandemic's out of the way, and we can focus on restarting the review. We've now doing that. So I've created in order to try and move things more quickly on, I've created a very small project team now in place. So Matt Burkett, who was one of the service managers, is now heading up the project team. It's only a very small project team. I'll literally name the 3 or 4 people in it, but Matt Burkett will lead that up, and we've got some finance has been seconded across to help with the modelling work. And one of the team leaders is going to move into that team as well, and then they can dedicate their time from now on to take forward the work. And very briefly, the programme for that work will be, and I started, is that sort of technical background exercise to look at the routes, to look what we already have, to start to do some work and make sense of those in terms of how they might start to change. So a very technical exercise. We're also in the process now, I don't know if Matt's already written to you or not yet, but he's in the process of writing to ward members to invite you to meet with him and 1 or 2 others to go through the routes like we do with the garden routes, to sit down with you as ward members, or for you to send in, however you prefer to do it, but so to engage with you as sets of ward members around the routes that as they currently are and the problems they cause. So again, I'm sure you get the lists out again, but that's a chance to really get quite specific in terms of certain streets that are regularly missed, or whether it's access issues, they need a smaller vehicle, they should be collected on a different day, that would make a big difference. All those sort of kind of local knowledge issues that will help shape the redesign of those routes. So that works on starting now, and you should expect some contact around that if you haven't already. And then they're actually doing the redesign work then from that. We'll then meet at the same time or similar time with all the crews. That was one of the issues about why it was very difficult to do during the pandemic. As I've described it, it's really important to involve yourselves. It is as equally important to involve the crews themselves in the reworking of their work and what they've got to do, both from a viewpoint of they've got a lot of knowledge and to shape what we do, but also they've got to do the work at the end of the day. So then they need to have that ownership. So it's very important we work with all the crews. So they're about equivalent to about 100 and 110 crews effectively to meet with separately, to have those individual conversations around their area that they cover. So that's quite an intensive and extensive exercise to do, but extremely important we do. We'll then come up with, eventually after all that work, come up with the geeky stuff will be done with the modelling. And so, again, I won't go into the details here, but I'm quite happy to sit outside of the meeting if anyone does want the details and is interested in how these things work. There's some quite complicated modelling that's done with the routes that takes into account traffic, the time taken to go to tip, the average time to pull a bin out, load it in the area that's involved. So it's quite sophisticated in that regard. And that will create draft routes then. We then meet again with the crews to go through those routes, to sense check them, to make sure that, although I've described this as quite sophisticated modelling, it's not infallible, and there might be stuff that just doesn't make sense from that. And then in that position, we'll be in a stage to then share that information with yourselves again, to say, look, this is what we're proposing, and we'll literally give you the maps, the routes, the days in your wards that the new routes will work on. Then at the end of all that, we're ready to announce that, if you like, to the public, and then there's a huge exercise then to be done, because what that will in effect lead to is, in all probability, the majority of people looking at either probably some sort of change to their collection date, or there could be quite a lot of impact. So we'll need to think carefully about the time of the year, the month that's done. And I think there's never going to be a good time, but there's going to be worse times to do it. So we wouldn't do it in the middle of summer, for example, in July, August, when the demands on the service are great. And similarly, probably we wouldn't do it at Christmas time, or that's probably the period, if we can get it aligned in time, probably around October, November is probably the least worst time for us from a service viewpoint, that sort of time. But that would involve us writing to everybody across the city, as we did do with the garden waste, for those that have a brown bin, and inform them of their new collection date. If there was a new collection, it would be everybody. And obviously do a lot of comms and publicity around it. Because things will go wrong. I've got to be honest, things will go wrong when you're talking 350,000 households and new routes being put across the whole city that crews have got to get used to as well. obviously my job is to minimise things going wrong and to respond quickly where they do and resolve those. But the more comms we can do around it, the better. And clearly, members are a key part of that for us. So, we'd really appreciate your help when it comes to that in terms of helping us with some of those comms and social media, no doubt, posts. That's it really. Probably what I didn't say, but I think you already know, is that one of the big reasons for the review as well is around the fact that there are lots of new builds that have happened in the last 10 years, but also we'll be building in the known plans that we're told about into the routes so they're future-proof to a degree. Obviously, we can only build in what we're told about and what's reasonable. They won't include massive developments. We'll have to deal with them separately, but certainly sort of the small to medium-sized developments that we're told about through the planning framework, we'll be building those in so that we're at least future-proof for 2, 3, 4 years. And then finally, the last point is that this is something we want to embed in, so we don't just reach vision like we did this time, where we have to get to the end of 7 or 8, 9 years and things are falling apart to initiate a review. We'll build in the next review for 5 years time-ish, so we'll all know that these routes, because they will start to fall apart again after a certain amount of years, even though we're building in 3 or 4 years worth of housing growth, there'll be other developments that happen and further housing growth happens and further things will change down the line. So we'll build in another review in 5 years' time. The only caveat I'd give to that is, and we'll discuss it in the next item, is it all depends, of course, what we do as well around any change that were required from the government around the Environment Act and the resource waste strategy and how they impact on everything I've just mentioned. It shouldn't have too much of an impact because this is about black and green bins we're talking about and everything. And there's, of course, the second item is mainly additionality stuff to that, but there could be some impact on that.
Are there any questions on what John has said in that section? I know I've got Sam and Linda and then Alan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that brief that introduction there, John. I want to ask one particular issue, which is there is mention on Objective 7 to ensure we can reliably make collections in the more challenging locations and bring different solutions and resources to support collections in these areas. We need to do something different in our most challenging areas, and that may include variations on our delivery model and collaborative working with CNT, Cleaner Neighbourhoods team. What I wanted to ask on that particular issue, I know there are increasing numbers of hard to access routes that are being added on, but obviously at the same time, I appreciate that given the significant increase in tonnage, what role has that played in the wider review? Or are we still looking at the fact that we're still collecting excess, or are we accepting that we're in a new normality? And the second question on that is in particular the fact that 3 of our wards, well, especially the Wetherby ward being the highest in terms of missed routes previously, we're in the situation that obviously you can only have up to 2 shunts a day from another vehicle, potentially compared to 3 in other wards. And how is that being factored in making sure that the service in our wards is just as good as those that are closer to the disposal sites for rubbish? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Firth. Yeah, to obviously good, excellent questions. And the first one around the what was the first one around the what was the first? What? Sorry.
It was about Objective 7, which is talking about variations in the delivery model, including closer collaborative working with CNT. In terms of most challenging locations. And I wanted to know whether that is hard to access or whether it is the wider rural areas that we particularly have in our wards, and also more generally, how that plays into the fact of whether tonnage is included in the review or whether actually basically, are we accepting the new normality, or are we still going on the fact that we're saying that we're collecting excess than what we collected before the pandemic?
Sorry, yeah, brain freeze. Yeah, I'll answer that is yes, in terms of the question you're asking. So what we were making sure is that when we redesign the routes, we base them on the new tonnages. So we've put in the budget for next year an additional amount of money to assume that the tonnages that we've been experiencing continue. Slightly less, because we expect it to be slightly less. We don't expect it to be average of between 10 or 11% as has been the average over the last 2 years. So we're building in more in the region of 5, 6, 7%. So we are building in, and then they will be built into the modelling. So we won't be modelling on the old tonnages. The baseline will be upped. So that will, in part, answer the next part of the question around reassurance that we design the new routes for places like Wetherby that are achievable. So that both from a viewpoint of they'll be using the new tonnages. So whereas heavy presentation would have caused an issue before, they'll build in the new tonnages. But if that requires, therefore, more routes to achieve that, which is what we're having to, in effect, subsidise through the shunting arrangement, that what the actual answer is, you need more route, more capacity. So that the model will design that in, yes. So we don't want to rely on shunting. It still might be for those that, particularly the public, that might not understand the term shunting. So what we do is where we have collection vehicles going round and the travel time to tip off is quite considerable because the distance they've got to travel is a lot, and they're travelling at certain times of the day when it's more, takes longer. We send a spare vehicle out with a driver, that's called a shunt driver, who basically swaps the vehicles over, gives them an empty one to carry on the round with, so they can just crack on, and they go and tip off the vehicle. So it's a more efficient way of working and takes that downtime off. But what the negative side of that is, and I think the point you're making, Councillor Firth, is you can only ask crews to do only so much work in a day, so you can't ask them to just continually be shunted and therefore do 3 or 4 times more work than the designed to do that day. So a lot of the time that ends up still in failures. So we need to design that out, absolutely, and that certainly will be. I'm hoping as well the new depot and facilities that are currently being built, which are due to be transferred to us on April 25th from Kia Construction, and then we'll be starting to move our new operations in over May, and hopefully getting them all in by June. That should help make a bit of a difference in terms of some of the efficiencies of how we work, but it'll be marginal in what you're highlighting, Councillor Firth, because it's not that far from where we're based now.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Richards.
Thank you very much, Chair. Right, John, thank you very much for this report, because it does indeed address many of the issues that have been raised, because as we know, Wetherby is the one that holds the crown in the city for some of the most missed collection points. However, my question would be, whilst many of the proposals will indeed address it, such as you're saying about looking at the routes and actually recognising a need to create additional routes, there is no time schedule put in for this. And my concern is that it will just keep moving further and further forward. I've got a second question which kind of sits with that one, which is that you've got a list of recommendations and you've said yourself about the routes planning, you've talked about the types of vehicles that will be used, and particularly in our rural areas, that really does cause a number of issues because they simply they're not able to get where they need to be. So are some of the recommendations going to be able to be implemented before the whole of the review is completed, so that some of the mitigation of the issues can actually take place, rather than having to wait for a proposed review at some time in the future? So 1, when is it going to happen? And 2, what things are going to happen quicker than others? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Right, I've written these ones down, so I'll remember now. Take the timescale first of all, sorry. I touched on the fact that we'll need to make a decision in terms of the timescale to an extent will be dictated about when we're best actually implementing it. And I suggested around the October-November time will be the better time of the year. 2022, I have to say, put that in first. So that's the kind of what I've got in my mind about the implementation time. I mean, we will complete the review by then, certainly. I can as much as I can guarantee anything, COVID permitting, that doesn't come back, that's achievable. I think I'm hoping we can have completed a substantial part of the review before then, and as you say, start to implement some parts of it. We do have, you're right in that Wetherby has been a challenging area, but there are other challenging areas such as Headingley, Hyde Park, Aerials, the city, high-rise flats, city centre. So that, and they are areas as well for us to focus on in terms of bespoke solutions. So as a citywide, I think we're looking at that kind of timescale, but that's more driven as well by, like I say, the practicalities of when to deliver the change, so that it has more chance of being successful and least disruptive for the customers, which is obviously what we all want. So the second part of your question, therefore, is even more pertinent, isn't it, about, so what about in the meantime then? So the two responses to that, really. One is that we will continue to invest extra resources and shunting and vehicles and backups in the meantime to make sure that we meet the demands and rectify any failures or provide that extra resource in areas such as yours that they need them, particularly in the routes that have got the heaviest presentation. So we'll continue that up to the point the new routes are implemented. So we will pledge to do that. And we have, for example, just in the last couple of months, put on a new hard to access vehicle for the city. So again, we will look at that, and it won't be the most efficient use of that resource, because we'll be putting an extra hard to access crew on that will be going to different parts of the city, on different days to deal with all the stick and plaster solutions we need. But we will do that, and we'll look at that in terms of the streets that are causing you the most concern, and try and get them on an actual hard to access route. And then once the review's completed, they should then transfer to the new designed route for your area, if that makes sense. Yeah. So, but again, if we can continue to work as we have been outside of the meeting on those sort of issues with Steve Walpole in particular, Steve should be having conversations with Matt around the design to make sure that those issues are being fed into the review. But where we're having continued problems in the meantime, we'll look to address that through temporary resources that we'll dedicate to those areas.
Thank you. That's fine.
So Councillor Lamb and then Councillor Cohen.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, firstly, I'd like to thank John, because it's the first time, it may have been said elsewhere, it's the first time I've heard anyone acknowledge that there's a problem that needs to be solved, and particularly in our area. And as you well know, John, I've raised it in executive board and in council and in other places and been told there is no problem. So I'm grateful that actually you are acknowledging what we see and hear from our residents every day. And that means once that's done, you can actually start to move forward and resolve the issue. And we could have been further forward a lot faster, I think, if not you, but others had perhaps taken the same approach. But I'm sure I'll get an opportunity to mention that to those people. The 3 points I would make is one significant change that could be made, which I think would help to focus minds, is actually the main headline reporting should be the bins that were missed on the day. In my business, in the restaurant trade, if I book somebody in for a meal at 7:30 on Saturday night to deliver them their meal on Monday, they won't consider that being on time, and they might get a bit cross. And I think it would help enormously if the headline figure was how many bins were missed on the day, rather than saying within 48 hours is considered on time. Most people don't see that. Second question is, what are we doing to learn from other places? So the one I would look at nearest to us is North Yorkshire, who seem to do a much better job with a better service and a more enhanced collection, as they've got roadside glass collections, plastic and so on, and you do not get the same level of issues in North Yorkshire by any means. So what are we doing to learn from other authorities? And the final one is, I wonder if you'd consider adding this as an objective. It's something that's come up in our ward around accessibility issues, and largely from cars blocking pavements. But the second biggest culprit is bins, particularly when they're missed and then left out for 48 hours, or with bin men not putting bins back where they got them from. And it might seem trivial until you see the videos of people in wheelchairs with disabilities, with visual impairments, trying to navigate their way around footpaths with things that shouldn't be there. And the refuse service is one of the biggest contributors to that. And I wonder if you'd consider adding that as an objective to try and do, there's a limit because the bins have to be left somewhere, and it's going to be on a footway, but could you look and see if there's at least something we can do about that?
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. So, yeah, I take the point, and obviously it's been made in a number of forums, including scrutiny around the point about when is a bin a misbin. And I've made some views clear on that, but I do understand what's being said, and I understand the analogy you're drawing. Got a slight issue with that in terms of, I don't think it's a direct analogy, but I understand the point you're making, and of course that's what we'd strive to do. We want to collect the bins on the day they're scheduled to be collected, and I recognise the fact that therefore we need to try and move towards reporting that and being accountable to that more, and that is something I will try and move more towards. I think the only point I'd probably make in slight mitigation is, although and I'm recognising the facts, and that's why the review was necessary and agreed to 2 years ago. There was a recognition that we needed to improve and redesign the service and things that can only get worse in 2 years, particularly as there's been a pandemic. They can't have got any better, the issues. So, but there are other things that aren't necessarily our fault of why a bin's not collected on the scheduled day. Some of those might be access issues that are out of our control, that are either residents or visitors or whatever that are causing those problems. Some of it might be weather related, that snow, ice, whatever it might be, or there might be a vehicle breakdown that's out of control. So there will always be, even with the greatest designed and most efficient service that's been delivered with fantastic new routes, there's going to be streets missed that we've pledged then to go back within 48 hours. So ultimately, the ultimate performance measure that I would accept is that we've put right any faults within those 48 hours. So all the bins that were supposed to be collected have been collected within at least those 48 hours. I agree, I'd like to move more towards being able to provide information that says, but how many bins have actually been collected on the day that it was scheduled. So I think we agree with that. But I'd just like to say that it's never going to be always possible for the 70,000 to 80,000 bins we collect each day across the city. What we're doing to learn from others, yes, fair point. You know, we can always learn from others. You give the example of North Yorkshire, perhaps I'll go and speak to those. I do meet regularly with my counterparts across the region, more so over the pandemic. We've been meeting quite regularly, and as you can imagine, and sharing notes and bouncing ideas off each other and making sure we're all up to speed with the changing world that there was during the pandemic. So we developed quite a close relationship over the pandemic. So we will be working much closer. We do also work closely with RAP, which are a national sort of consultancy body that the government use, and they've come to us actually about some examples of what we do to use for other councils. So we do use them as a kind of consultant, if you like, to advise us on good practice. So I take that point and absolutely wouldn't sit here presenting ourselves as we know it all and we're the best in the land. So yeah, we'll look at those certainly. The accessibility issues, I 100% agree. Bins on streets in terms of them presenting the kind of problems to people as you've described, Councillor Lamb, absolutely. We need to reduce that more. I have in the last appraisal period issued an objective to all refuse workers, refuse staff, specifically around that. So there was a specific objective in the last appraisal around putting bins back into a safe, but also a position, a place where it's not going to cause the least obstruction as possible to residents and to pedestrians. So we recognise that and trying to do something that and work with staff on that and explaining why that is, not just setting as an objective. That clearly is following up. We're in the appraisal review period at the moment, and something we'll be following up, and we won't just then let that go. It's still obviously an issue, and we'll probably repeat that next year in the appraisal and start to look then, once we've got it in a couple of appraisals and spoken and been supportive with staff and explained reasons, we can then be in a much better position then to take action where we need to, where that's not being done, because we've done the right thing in the first place. I'm also working with colleagues within the council that are meeting with, I think it's Pavements for People, a group, an active group across the city that have raised this issue with us through like a deputation to the council through us. So I'm putting together a bit of an action plan on that to respond to their specific ideas about what could be done around those particular issues you raised, Councillor Lamb, and I'm happy to share that with you in terms of what that action plan is, to hopefully reassure you. Any very localised specific issues you get around obstructions on street that are particularly the commercial bin related, but if they are our bins as well, and it's about individual households that particularly causing problems, again, we can take action through the Clean Neighbours team in terms of, and I know they have done in your area before, take action against households. Again, that would be through the legislation. We can't just go in and fine people. You know, we take reasonable action and try and persuade people to change their behaviours, obviously initially, and give fair warning, have the conversations, issue a warning note, but if necessary, we can then fine people for doing that. But I recognise it is difficult whilst we still ourselves are leaving bins in positions that aren't always the best, or we're not collecting all the bins all the time. So we need to get our own act completely sorted out as well, and that will help take action against others. But yeah, I do completely recognise that as a problem.
Okay.
Just to suggest that, and you may already have things like this from Pavements for People, but one of our local residents has taken some videos that they've been putting quite extensively on social media that highlight the issue. And once you see it, you think, I need to change my behaviour. And if it's helpful, I can forward them on to share with the crews, because you visually see the problem from a user's perspective. And the fact I'm really pleased with the answer, but the one thing you didn't say is if you'll commit to adding it as an objective on this list. Yeah.
Councillor Cohen, did you?
Sorry, can I just very quickly come back on those 2 points? So yeah, yes, we'll look at putting that as an objective on the list in terms of making sure it's something that reflects that. I thought there was already something that did actually, but clearly there isn't. So yeah, I think that's an important point to make. So yeah, we will do that. Yes, certainly.
Councillor Cohen.
Thank you, Chair, and I do want to echo some of the comments that Councillor Lamb said. I do find it bizarre that I don't really care what other measures we have for success, but the fact that we allow 48 hours after the collection date and still say we've done the job successfully. I understand the reasoning, John, I really do. But the expectation is we collect the bin on the day we say we're going to collect it. If we don't, we should be accepting that we've failed fundamentally. We might have a really good reason for that, and that's fine, it's perfectly legitimate, but we should not start on the basis that if we collect it the day after, that's as good a success as if we collected it on the day. And our metrics at the moment don't differentiate, and we should be differentiating. Whether we want to give ourselves an A, B or a C, I don't, but we should be differentiating where we hit on the day or whether we don't. So that's, I think, and I really would say really strongly that I would urge you to look at that within this review. Overall, this review can't come soon enough. I spend an inordinate amount of time writing to officers in refuse about bins that are missed, very often the same bins that are regularly missed. In fact, I've made some great friends over the past couple of years with residents who write to me on a bi-weekly basis. Guess what's happened again? And I suppose it's a positive. I've got to know some of my residents really, really well, because that's always nice. But in truth, I think both my residents and I would prefer that we had that relationship over some other issue rather than the fact that their bins regularly missed. So I'm hoping that this will resolve that. October the 22nd October this year, 2022, can't come soon enough in that regard, although I don't want to brush time away. What I also just urge, and it's not just refuse, but you're the guys sitting here, is some more joined up thinking with other council departments. We have a huge number of council houses in our ward. At the moment, there's some works going on in a number of them on some roofing works. That means that refuse collections can't take place because you can't access the bins. And if there was just a little bit of joined up thinking, I don't expect refuse to initiate it necessarily, but sometimes where it is initiated, just that bit more joined up thinking. But I like to always end on a positive. What I would say is where I do contact officers in refuse, particularly at the depot, it is rare indeed that when they tell me something's going to happen, it doesn't happen. And that is really reassuring. I shouldn't have to make the call, but if I already am, it is good to be able to acknowledge that they do fix the problem when it's brought to their attention. In fact, with a housing, with an issue with housing, this issue I just mentioned, they've actually put for the next 2 weeks an entirely different mechanism of collection. And that's really positive. It's just a shame it took me to have to make those early steps. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Firth, did you have a final question on this, please?
Thank you, Chair. There was one final concern, and unfortunately, I know that Councillor Kane wants to finish on a positive, but this is concerning. Objective 13, enable implementation of the Council's policies on excess bins, contamination and side waste, to develop a process to initially target and remove excessive black bins, which will involve the identification of the bins by crews. I just wanted to ask a simple question. Will it cost more money to do that process than actually just collect the bins as they are at the moment? And if we do remove the bins, will there be compensation for those residents that may have purchased those, but then suddenly may have had another stray bin that suddenly appeared? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, fair question. I don't anticipate it costing more than it would be to take the bins away. No, just to perhaps put your mind a little bit at rest around the issue in terms of perhaps that where we think we might be going with this. We're really talking about some properties that have 4 or 5 or 6 black bins. It's not about people who've got 2 or even probably 3. It's those that are beyond that, where, you know, there are properties, that's what we're talking about here. This isn't like the brown bin thing where we're going to remove, you know, we're going to say we're going to collect one, you know, this is, so which I can understand you thinking that this is really about those excesses where it's just ridiculous. People are presenting, you know, like I say, 5 or 6 black bins. So something differently is happening there. There's either business or something differently happening in there, or they're not using the green bins. So it's to drive people, yes, to be using the green bins more, and we're going to look at trying to provide more green bins and certainly provide a second green bin on demand rather than have to justify it through, you know, a number of household in your household. So in the future, we're going to try and just say, look, if you want a second green bin, as long as you commit to using it properly and recycling more, you can have a second green bin for free. So we're going to try and do those 2 things together, but this is not about removal of the second black bin where we think they should only have 1. And I wouldn't imagine we'd probably even get to the one where there's 3 bins to start with. We'd do it sensibly and proportionately, and this is targeting those with 4, 5, 6 bins. But even then, we'll be just a bit careful. And that's why we want this objective to make sure we're not, the crews are clear what we're asking to do here. There'll be a process in place, and there might be very, very exceptional circumstances where 3 or 4 bins are okay because the crews don't know it, but actually there's 3, that property is actually 2 or 3 properties, or there just is an exceptionally large household or a medical situation, whatever it might be, that demands those bins. But just to reassure Councillor Firth, this is actually about those real excesses. So that kind of answers your first question, really. It's not a massive exercise, this. It's not going to cost a huge amount to put in place. But crews, as you can imagine, get themselves very frustrated when they have to collect so many bins. It's, you know, silly.
John, I'm conscious of officers' time as well as everybody else's, but you presented a report, the Appendix B was about the collection of household waste and recycling. Now, if any member has a specific question to do with recycling, then I'm quite happy for you to ask John that refers to the report. But I'd ask you to look at the bit about food and glass collections, that those are the 2 points that cause concern to residents. And so if there are any questions on what John has written in his report, I'm happy to take those. And then you don't have to go through the whole thing, John. So are there any questions from members? Councillor Buckley? No? Anybody else? No, all right then, councillor Firth.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, I don't mean to single anybody out in the public gallery, but obviously we have somebody today from Barwick and Scholes Parish Council, and today I joined Councillor Slater at the opening of the new post office facility at the pavilion in Scholes. And the big question that came to me from a number of residents today was actually the lack of glass provision in and around Scholes. Obviously, there is the provision in Barwick, and also, although it's now castrated with the cut off of Thorner Lane from Thorner, there are two there. Could you explain in terms of what sort of process they would need to go through in terms of actually looking at how they can improve glass collection, and also more generally in a village like Scholes where there might be a facility where that's available potentially to be placed? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Yeah, we're absolutely love to put more bottle banks wherever, whether it's Scholes or anywhere within the wards that you'd like them to be situated. And we will accommodate that and put them there. We're crying out for more places to put them. So the issue, of course, will be location. So that someone will come out, meet, or if you give suggestions of where that you'd like us to look at, we'd come out and meet with you, or and have discussions around that. They need to be obviously accessible, so that the lorry can come along and lift it. So they'll look at the site and make sure there's no overhanging trees or lampposts in place that would prevent access, safe access. Providing that's all okay. The second obvious question then is, we're not going to annoy anyone, are we, by putting it here and when it's emptied? And they've historically been the things that have prevented stuff. And actually, historically, the conversation's been the other way around about we want the things taken away. We don't want them. So we're really pleased that people want them. But let's work together on where that is and what will work locally, so that they can be safely cleared and they don't cause a nuisance that ends up backfiring, really. But we'll always take them away if that's the case. If you do come back to us and say, look, actually, in hindsight, it's causing more problems than it's solving. So more than happy to have those discussions. Come to me in the first place, and I'll make sure you put onto the right person to then have some quick discussions with you around that.
Thank you very much for that, John, and we'll bring it up after the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time, John, and thank you for the reports, especially in the time frame that you delivered it. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is John Grieve to present his reports for the last time, ladies and gentlemen, on dates, times and venues of community committee meetings in 2022 and 23.
Thank you, Chair. So this report comes every year to members, date, times, venue and community committee meetings. So Outer North East normally meets on Mondays at 5:30. We're proposing that continues. Paragraph number 7, we identify 4 dates. So 27th of June, 19th of September, 12th of December, 13th of March. So there's 4 dates, but additional dates can be added if members wish to do so. I think that's it, Chair. Just waiting for members' approval of the dates or alternative suggestions.
And we're happy to approve those dates, ladies and gentlemen. Can't guarantee that, Councillor Lamb. Yeah.
I'll be watching from my armchair.
So I could take it we can approve those dates then, John. Thank you. Agenda item number 11 is the Outer North East Community Committee Finance Report. Now, Preet isn't going to sit and read it through. The pertinent points that she needs to do are to get ratification of some of the initiatives. So, Preet, can you go through those, please?
Thank you, Chair. So I'll start with page 25, point 19, the defibrillator for Moralton Elderly Care. Is that approved? Yeah. The next one is a youth activity project, 2 youth activity projects in terms of the report pack. So we've got Scarcroft Cricket Club, 4,000, and that's for Harewood. And then we've got Tea Time Tennis, again, 4,000 for Harewood.
we all happy? Thank you.
The next project is the Leeds Rhinos Summer Camp, and this is for all Woodley 10.
They do?
Yeah. Shall I take that as agreed? Okay, super stuff. I shall move on to the supplementary information. Starting from the top, Westfield Lane Ford, 2000 for Harewood. Queen's Platinum Jubilee benches or Woodley. Cool.
Is that why? Oh, okay. Is there anything else?
Yes, I shall carry on. Boston Spa Weekend Festival, Wetherby, and then finally Youth Activity Leeds Rhino Summer Camp. Again, sports and drama for Wetherby. Excellent. That's all I have, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Agenda item number 12 is the Outer North East Community Committee update report. If anybody has any questions to ask Preet. No, that's fine. That'll do for me. Thank you very much for the report, Preet. Very comprehensive.
Thank you,
and yes,
Chair.
the Leeds Rhino activity was absolutely fantastic in Wetherby. Thank you very much. Item number 13 is the Queen's Platinum Jubilee Celebrations Work Group. Is there anything you want to say, Preet or Ryan, about that?
Thanks, Chair. Just to say that we've had our second meeting this week, and there were some questions raised, and I'll look into those and get back to the working group.
Very much. Agenda item number 14 is the date and time of the next meeting, which is Monday, the 27th of June at 5:30, but the venue is to be confirmed. So you'll find out about that later. Good, I hope you will. Now, although that concludes the business, it is John's last meeting, not just his last community committee meeting, but his last meeting ever working for Leeds City Council. After some, what was it, John? 45 years? 45 years. So, yeah, he must have done. So what we did was, I asked colleagues if they had any comments they'd like to make. So there's been one or two people that sent me some stuff. So one bit was somebody said, you might like to mention that John's start date of the 16th of August 1977 was the day that Elvis Presley died. So there you go. Does that make you feel old? Right. Okay. Right. And for those of the members who don't remember who Elvis Presley was from 1977, he was quite popular. All right. Okay. So following on from that theme, John, just buckle in here, love. Right. I'm going to read this out as the way the person wrote it. So it says, I think it would be nice if somebody said, I'll remember you, or tell him that the wonder of you has been that you've served the council for so long. Because Leeds has 3 councillors per ward, where no one stands alone, we've never had a little less conversation at our committee meetings, which could occasionally be described as a mess of blue. But John's never been all shook up by that, nor by the occasional devil in disguise. Instead, John has encouraged us to don't be cruel. The joy of the Outer North East is that he hasn't had to work in the ghetto. Then again, Wetherby or Woodley and Harewood isn't exactly Viva Las Vegas. So we send John on his way with a good luck charm as he leaves to spend more time on the green, green grass of home. That's a Tom Jones song, but anyway. And I just can't help believing that if we never meet again, then the committee won't be the same without him. And so in closing, we should all say thank you and Johnny be good. We do have a couple of small tokens of appreciation because I think Find the other one. Lost it. Very, very small tokens of appreciation. This is from Preet. You. And this one is from the rest of us. All right. So thank you very much, John. I'd like to add my personal thanks, because chairing this committee has on some occasions been quite challenging, but with you at my side, it's been a pleasure. Okay, thank you very much. So with that, I shall end the meeting. Oh, do you want to
Chair, just before you go, I just want to thank you all. And whoever wrote that Elvis thing, it was really good. We've obviously put a lot of work into it, and it's really appreciated. So I think my final words on that basis is Elvis has left the building.